Did you know that a logistics officer turned the tide of an entire mission, single-handedly saving a squad in a deadly kill zone? Unbelievable, right? But it happened. If you're curious to know how, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unbelievable stories like this one. It was just another day at the remote base, until she stepped off the helicopter. Lieutenant Aria Ford had no weapon, no special orders, and no obvious reason to be there. All she had was a clipboard and the steady gaze of someone who had seen too many places like this to be unnerved. No one had expected her arrival, and certainly no one expected what would happen next. The base, a cluster of worn-down walls and tangled wire, stood as a silent testament to years of wear and tear. Dust choked the air, and the sun hung heavy, casting a relentless glare over the Afghan landscape. Ford's presence seemed almost misplaced amid the grit and chaos, as if she was a figment of bureaucracy thrust into a battlefield that didn't care for paperwork. The soldiers around her scrambled to prepare for another mission, their boots heavy with fatigue, their eyes hollow from endless days of war. Sergeant Ethan Cross stood in the shade of a nearby tent, watching her approach. He had seen many officers like her before, unremarkable, their purpose unclear. He rolled his eyes as she crossed the dusty landing zone, clipboard in hand, her steps deliberate but without the urgency he had come to associate with those who truly understood the weight of war. She wasn't an operator, wasn't someone built for the unpredictable chaos of combat. She was, in his eyes, just another logistics officer. What's she doing here? Cross muttered under his breath, his irritation rising as the mystery deepened. But Ford's gaze never wavered, and as the dust from the helicopter settled, she did something few had the nerve to do. She simply stood there, absorbing the heat and grit, her eyes locked on the horizon. She wasn't flinching. She wasn't ducking. And that was the moment Cross realized something had changed. This was no ordinary officer. This was no ordinary day. Ford had arrived, and no one, not even Cross, knew yet how much her presence would alter the course of this mission. The briefing room was thick with the weight of unspoken fears. Lieutenant Aria Ford sat at the back, her gaze unwavering as Sergeant Ethan Cross and the others discussed the hostile terrain they were about to face. Despite the tension that gripped the room, Ford's presence seemed like an afterthought, a logistics officer sent to observe, they all assumed. No one took her seriously. Cross watched her, irritation bubbling under the surface. She didn't belong here, he thought. The Scar. The valley that had claimed so many lives, was no place for someone like Ford. The men who had gone before had returned battered, broken, or not at all. Yet, there she was, scribbling notes with that quiet precision that unnerved him. She didn't ask questions. She didn't interrupt. It was as if the briefing held no surprises for her. She's just here to watch, Cross muttered to his comrade, Sergeant Ben Carver. They want us to babysit a logistics rep while we go into that hellhole. Carver, equally unimpressed, spat in the dust. Guess that's what they think will keep us alive, a clipboard and some observation. But Ford was not one to conform to the stereotype they'd placed her in. As the conversation continued, her pen moved steadily, marking points that seemed trivial to the others but held a different weight for her. She glanced at the screen, her eyes locking onto the terrain features with an intensity that Cross could not ignore. She wasn't just taking notes. She was calculating something. She was assessing. Cross felt a flicker of doubt. There was more to Ford than her quiet demeanor. Something in the way she focused so intently on the maps and coordinates suggested she knew more about survival in this terrain than anyone could have expected. The day had come. Echo Squad, along with Ford, was about to embark on a mission into the Scar, the valley that had already swallowed whole squads and left no trace. The convoy rolled out as planned, and Ford, now silent, settled into her seat in the Humvee. Her bag was at her feet, and her eyes never left the horizon. The men in the convoy spoke little, their focus narrowing with every mile closer to the heart of the Scar. Maris, the squad leader, glanced at Ford from time to time, wondering if she truly understood what was about to happen. Optimal vantage point, she had said when asked about her role. Yet, the way she carried herself now, more operational than administrative, unsettled him. "You planning to join the patrol, ma'am?" Cross asked, his voice laced with disbelief. Ford's answer was simple, as usual, "I'll observe from the optimal vantage point." Maris watched her with growing concern. Optimal for observation isn't optimal for survival. The scar's no place for an observer. Ford met his gaze. "Then I'll try not to get in your way." Something about her confidence made Maris pause. For the first time, he wondered if she wasn't just another officer who had never seen combat but someone who understood what this mission truly entailed. As the convoy neared the edge of the scar, the radio chatter began to grow sparse. The seriousness of the mission weighed on everyone. But Ford, unfazed, continued to observe, her every movement methodical as she scanned the terrain with sharp eyes. This wasn't just about taking notes anymore. Ford was about to show them she was far more than they had assumed. The convoy halted at the ridge overlooking the scar, the valley below both peaceful and deadly. The soldiers dismounted, checking their weapons and adjusting their gear for the descent. Ford remained behind, exactly as Maris had instructed. She set herself up behind an outcropping of rocks, using binoculars to scan the valley below. Her posture was calm, but her mind was calculating. Echo Squad prepared for the worst. They knew the terrain better than anyone, yet no amount of preparation had kept previous teams safe. As each man checked his gear one last time, the weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. The scar had a way of swallowing everything, the enemy, the soldiers, the mission. "Observer stays here," Maris said, his voice firm but not unkind. Ford simply nodded, her attention still focused on the valley. The men knew the risks. They'd been here before, and they knew how quickly things could go wrong. Down in the valley, nothing seemed out of place, not yet. The scar's deadly grip was invisible, like a quiet predator watching from the shadows. Ford, however, wasn't just observing, she was studying the environment, watching for signs of life hidden in the rocky expanse. She wasn't here to file reports or take notes. She was here because, somehow, she knew the odds weren't as stacked against them as they appeared. The moment Echo Squad began their descent, Ford's voice came over the radio, calm as ever, "Maintain calm schedule." 30 minutes in. It was business as usual. But behind her calm exterior, Ford was already preparing for what came next. What she had seen from the ridge, and what the squad didn't yet know, was that the scar had underestimated her. And the tide of the mission was about to shift. The quiet on the radio stretched for what felt like hours. Echo Squad's routine radio checks, once a lifeline, now became nothing more than static. Sergeant Ethan Cross stood rigid at the edge of the ridge, watching the valley with growing unease. They had passed the first checkpoint without issue, but now, silence. Echo 1 to Overwatch, Cross's voice crackled over the radio, but there was no response. For a moment, Cross felt something cold tighten around his chest. Something had gone wrong, but he couldn't place it. His gaze snapped to the horizon, where the shadows of the scar seemed to stretch further than before. He was used to the silence of a tense mission, but this was different. This silence felt like a trap, like the calm before an inevitable storm. Echo 1 to Overwatch, status report, he repeated, his voice gaining urgency. But again, only static answered. They had lost contact with Ford, their designated observer, and it wasn't like her to go quiet. Then, the sound of gunfire broke the silence. It was sharp, brief, and unmistakable. The noise echoed through the valley. And this time, it wasn't coming from their position. It was coming from above. Ford, the logistics officer who had been dismissed as an observer, was now doing something no one expected. Cross's eyes widened. "Someone's up there," he muttered. He was the first to realize it wasn't the enemy opening fire. It was Ford, moving with calculated precision. She was neutralizing the threat, clearing the path where Echo Squad had been pinned. And now, the scar, which had held them frozen in place, was coming alive with the sound of warfare, but it wasn't aimed at them. Ford had changed the course of the mission in a matter of minutes. Echo Squad's fate was no longer uncertain, thanks to her. As the gunfire faded, Cross couldn't believe what was happening. The SEALs, once moments from surrender, suddenly found themselves in a different fight. And it wasn't one they had to lose. Echo 1, continue mission, Ford's calm voice echoed over the radio, as though she were reporting routine updates. Opposition is being neutralized. Cross's confusion turned into disbelief. Who was she? This was no logistics officer. The woman who had only moments ago sat with her clipboard, observing, was now taking down enemies with deadly accuracy. He couldn't process it fast enough. Who's neutralizing it? Santos demanded, his voice tense as he moved into a better position. The response came with quiet certainty. I am. It clicked. The woman who had been an observer, the one they all thought was unqualified for this mission, was the one pulling them from the jaws of death. It was surreal. Just a few hours ago, Cross had thought of her as someone whose job was nothing more than taking notes and keeping track of supplies. But Ford had done the unthinkable. In the span of minutes, she had shifted the mission from potential failure to success. The scar, a place that had claimed the lives of so many, was now being cleared. Cross could hear it over the radio. The enemy was being driven out, one shot at a time. Within 20 minutes, the missing SEALs, Martinez and Chen, were found alive, barely, but alive. Thanks to Ford, the impossible had been made possible. The helicopter that came to extract them soon lifted off, leaving the valley still. But nothing would ever be the same again. Ford had shown them all what a true warrior looked like, not in armor, but in the quiet, determined steps of someone who had refused to accept defeat. Life often teaches us that appearances can be deceiving. Just as a quiet, unassuming observer can turn the tide in a life-or-death situation, we too may find strength and resilience within ourselves when faced with adversity. The key lesson is that true courage isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes, it's the quiet determination that changes everything. In moments of uncertainty, it's the inner resolve, the willingness to act despite the odds, that defines who we truly are. If this message resonates with you, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to support my channel for more inspiring stories.